Hello and welcome to Lunchtime Agenda. I'm Tom Connell. Well, for months now we've been hearing out of Indonesia a severe reluctance on their part about Tony Abbott's asylum seeker policy. We've heard from as high up as the Foreign Minister, Marty Natalegawa, that they do have issues with parts of this policy, in particular the turning back the boats when safe to do so towards Indonesian waters, although not towing them into Indonesian waters. Overnight we heard from one Indonesian MP saying he believes this policy is not only illegal but also offensive. Pretty strong words. Tony Abbott was asked about this today. He was reluctant to expand on his comments. He says, and he stuck by this mantra again today, he doesn't want to engage in megaphone diplomatic relations.
We absolutely, totally respect Indonesia's sovereignty. We aren't going to conduct discussions with Indonesia through the media. Too much damage has been done in the past by megaphone diplomacy, and it's never going to happen under this government.
On Labor's side of the fence, we learnt today that Paul Howes will not step up and try to get a Senate position. He was pretty honest today, Paul Howes. He said this could be divisive for the Labor Party, a sign of just how honest. Well, he's not selecting or not trying to get this Senate position before it's even come up. We don't know what Bob Carr's going to do, whether he will step down and make a vacant Senate position for Labor in New South Wales, but Paul Howes already ruling himself out. Have a listen.
I would not be a candidate for that Senate vacancy if it does occur. I'm encouraged and humbled and honoured by the support and encouragement that I've received from numerous of my colleagues across the movement to run for this position. But it is clear that if I was to be a candidate for this position, it would be a divisive, negative and destructive fight within the New South Wales branch of the Australian Labor Party. The Labor Party needs to stop focusing on individuals.
Joining me today to discuss this and the other political issues of the day, we have here in Canberra Scott Ryan, of course the newly minted Parliamentary Secretary, and also in Sydney we have Stephen Jones as well. Scott Ryan, I will start with you now. This is an interesting trip coming up for Tony Abbott, but he's spoken about how important this relationship is, we know that. Has he backed himself into a bit of a corner here, because he's also talking about stopping the boats? That's an ironclad guarantee, and he's saying that despite many of the noises we've heard out of Indonesia, a lot of different people saying they don't like this turning back the boats policy.
Well, what Tony Abbott said this morning indicates the way the coalition government wants to make this relationship more mature. That you don't conduct sensitive conversations through the media. You don't conduct what Tony quite rightly described as the megaphone diplomacy that the previous government practiced. And you know, we entirely respect Indonesia, we respect its sovereignty, but these are discussions that will take place in a sensitive and responsible fashion.
And you can understand that, not wanting to go that megaphone diplomacy. Look, we'd rather some more grabs, but he's entitled to do that. But just on the policy itself, we've already seen the PNG policy that Labor introduced have a pretty significant effect on boat arrivals. You've got other elements you're going to introduce, such as temporary protection visas. Why not see how effective that is before trying to perhaps push this to a diplomatic flashpoint? Why not take the stopping the boats off the table for now, see if those policies have an effect, rather than try to push this?
Well, I think you're making an assumption there that's not necessarily a fair one. If you conduct our relationship with Indonesia in the way it was conducted by the previous coalition government, one that's based on mutual respect, one where conversations take place in private, one where you understand the legitimate aims, sovereignty and aspirations of both countries, you're making an assumption there that I don't think is a reasonable one. Our position on border protection and stopping the boats has always been based on a suite of policies that were put in place and that worked under the Howard coalition government.
But turning back the boats has always been central. Isn't that something they perhaps should be?
It's been part of the policy, and as the Prime Minister made clear, temporary protection visas, which the new Minister Scott Morrison can reintroduce now that he's been sworn in, are another part of that policy. There hasn't ever been a silver bullet to border protection and the crisis that Labor brought upon Australia by undoing the successful policies. But we're not going to conduct negotiations and conversations with our friends and neighbours in public.
We'll wait and see if that is something raised. Perhaps it won't even come up in those meetings. We'll wait and see. That's going to be an interesting visit. Stephen Jones, the point the coalition has made several times, one of the key bits of this relationship they say was hurt, was about this live cattle trade export, that one that was stopped quite suddenly. In hindsight, that is something, isn't it, that damaged the relationship and could have been handled better?
Look, it's important that we have frank and open communication with the Indonesians on live cattle and other matters, but I think you've let the coalition off lightly there. Scott said that they didn't offer themselves as a silver bullet. Well, that's exactly what they went to the electorate with, promising a silver bullet on the issue of asylum seekers. What's on offer instead is a wet rag. What we're seeing is only 24 hours after they've been sworn in, their three-word slogans are crashing into diplomatic and political reality. The Indonesians have made it quite clear that they will not agree to what Tony Abbott said that he wanted to do throughout the election campaign. And as for not conducting megaphone diplomacy, well, you might have had a whisper in Julie Bishop's ear a couple of weeks ago when she made the embarrassing gaffe that sometimes the Indonesians say things to her in private that is different to what they say in public. I mean, there's a lot of patching up to be done on the coalition side when they sit down with the Indonesians in a few days' time. But one thing is quite clear: if we are going to get a resolution of asylum seeker and people smuggling issues, we need the cooperation of the Indonesians. You don't get the cooperation of the Indonesians if you start poking them with a stick as your first act.
All right, well, we'll wait and see. As I said, that meeting with Tony Abbott is heading over there at the end of the month. It promises to be pretty interesting. I just want to move on to the public service and obviously those department heads that were sent packing yesterday. John Howard started his term in office with 6 going, Tony Abbott now 3. Is it true to say your side of politics has politicised these appointments somewhat by sending them packing like that?
Not at all, Tom. 2 of the 3 departments involved had substantial changes. The department for which I'm partly responsible under Christopher Pyne has been dramatically changed, the Education Department. The Industry Department is substantially larger and has been the result of significant changes to the administrative orders that were released yesterday. This is about getting the right people in the right jobs, and we are going to work with the great Australian public service. We completely respect the work they do, but some changes were made to reflect the changes and arrangements of government departments.
But on those changes, I mean, let's look at who it was. Don Russell, very close to Paul Keating. Blair Comley, he was involved in the price on carbon. Andrew Metcalf once said turning back the boats wouldn't work. It seems more than a coincidence, and you can add in Martin Parkinson, who seemed to be on notice according to Joe Hockey. It seems like a coincidence that these are the men to go, not to be shifted out of roles, but to go altogether.
Well, the Department of Industry has been quite substantially changed. It's a much larger department, and it has a great deal more additional roles than it did previously. The Department of Climate Change we were abolishing, and that's what you said Mr Comley was initially responsible for. So yeah, this is about getting the right people in the right jobs, and it's about actually making sure that our methodical, calm approach to implementing our election policies can start from day one.
Stephen Jones, on the departure of Martin Parkinson, it's been reported as something that was done reluctantly, but he hasn't officially been sacked. Given some of the estimates, though, from Treasury that really hurt Labor and that pledge to bring a surplus that really didn't come to bear at all, you'd have to say that someone in Treasury needs to be responsible, don't they?
Look, I think Martin Parkinson's a fine public servant, as the other 2 have fallen victim of the day of the long knives. What this very clear message that is being sent out by the incoming government is this: if you've got an independent view on climate change, if you've got an independent view on the economy, on the environment, then here's the door. It doesn't send a very good message through to the public service. A lot of damage has been done in their first act. And as far as Treasury goes, any leading economist in the country will tell you that some of the finest economic minds and the best economic modelling gets done out of the Australian Treasury, has been done so for decades. They are independent, they won't be lent on by their political masters, and if Treasury can't get it right in terms of some of the economic forecasting, then that simply says that there is a lot of uncertainty in the economy, a message that the government has been talking about for the Labor government was talking about for at least the last 18 months when we were in office.
Stephen, I'll move on to Labor leadership. Now, it's a familiar topic, but a very different spin on it, of course, this contest between Bill Shorten and Anthony Albanese. We've heard about how positive we want this campaign to be, but a few sly words. Anthony Albanese saying that he could at least say he's been loyal to both Julia Gillard and also Kevin Rudd, a pretty veiled reference, it seems, to Bill Shorten's involvement in Kevin Rudd's dismissal back in 2010. We heard Bill Shorten say, well, pointed out very helpfully perhaps that he knows that Anthony Albanese has always been a Rudd backer. Is this perhaps an example of some of the issues here, that it is going to turn a little bit nasty when you're going to have such a public contest with this leadership?
Look, I don't think it's going to turn nasty at all, and I think you're reading actually too much into a few aside comments. You can take what Bill and Anthony Albanese have said at their word, and I've been up close to both of them in the last week. What you can see is that we are going to have a very clean, a very civil discussion. I think it's a good one. If you compare the way we're conducting ourselves to the knock 'em down fights that they have during the US primaries, then I think you'll see that this is a very civil and a very good discussion that we're having within the Labor Party. Will be strengthened because of it, and whoever wins, we know that we'll get a good leader that the entire party, the entire caucus can lock in behind.
Scott Ryan, having spoken to the rank and file at a couple of these meetings with Anthony Albanese, they were all pretty excited at least to be having a say in this. Can you see the time one day when the Liberal Party might have something similar in terms of this involvement from these rank and file members?
Well, let's look at why the Labor Party's turned to this, and it's because they had a completely dysfunctional caucus for the last 6 years, where for most of the time in government, one side was trying to tear down another. I mean, I come from Victoria, where we institute a system of party members voting for their local candidates, party plebiscites, and that has led to a great deal of engagement. But there's no cry from our party members to have a role like this, because we've always thought that this is an appropriate role for parliamentarians.
Can't see it happening then for the one day for the.
Well, we haven't had the same problems that Labor's had.
Yeah, well, regardless of what happened though.
Well, I think that's. I don't think you can divorce what Labor's going through now from the chaos of the last 3 years.
But you can just ask separately whether you think it would be.
Well, I actually like having party plebiscites for pre-selections, but I'm quite happy with the way we do it at the Liberal Party at the moment, with one's colleagues deciding on the leadership.
Fair enough. You'll have to answer to your rank and file over that.
I've got to say, a
Stephen
courageous
Jones.
comment. A courageous comment. You could just have a peer over to Spring Street and see what's going inside your party colleagues over there, mate. A courageous comment talking about a one political party tearing themselves apart. Not a pretty sight what's going on over there in your Victorian
colleagues.
colleagues.
Stephen, you're from New South Wales. That's where the gold standard of chaos and tearing down leaders starts.
Oh, tune it up.
All right, well, we'll put the boxing gloves down for 1 minute, Jen. Stephen Jones, I just wanted to mention Paul Howes, obviously, pretty honest stuff today in saying that he wouldn't be running for this Senate position, which isn't even vacant yet, so a sign of how keen he was to rule himself out of it. He said he might need to be even more faceless over the next few years. Is this him saying particularly the involvement of the unions is a bit too strong and noticeable when it comes to Labor?
Oh, look, good on Paul for coming out today and putting the speculation to rest. You're right, there isn't a vacancy. I don't anticipate there'll be a vacancy in the near future, but there's been a lot of speculation about what Paul would do in relation to the Senate or other seats around the place. I think he's done the right thing. He knows that he's got a tough job ahead of him, because whatever Tony Abbott and the coalition have said in the lead up to the election campaign, we know that IR is in their sights, and the union movement needs good, smart, articulate leaders like Paul Howes in there in the front line, defending their members against what Tony Abbott's got in store.
All right, Jens, we do have to leave it there. I know that you will say to that, of course, that Tony Abbott said he won't make any changes outside his mandate. So I'll just paraphrase you there, Scott, if that's okay. Jens, thank you both for your time. After the break, we'll have more, a little bit on the gay marriage, possibly being legalised here in the ACT, and also that Labor Leadership Challenge. We'll check in with our reporter, David Lipson. Stay with us.